Hi, this is John Feedme, also known as SPOR. I'm here in LA at East West Studios with my Razer Blade, and I'm going to talk you through a little bit about the percussion in a track I made called Rat Trap. First off though, my battery's very low.
At a 90-degree angle.
The principal ingredient, so to speak, of the low end of this track is basically an 808 kick drum. Something that anyone that listens to any like trap or hip hop is going to be really familiar with. In this instance, I wanted to make sure that the track had good sonic presence, even on small speakers. If you put a lot of emphasis on your low end, but don't really have any harmonics in it, it's going to disappear on a small speaker. And unless you start doing some psychoacoustic stuff, it's going to just become invisible. So to try and like force a bit more out of the kick drum and give it a bit more presence across the board, I basically just over EQ'd it. So which is something I wouldn't normally do. So this is the clean kick drum. I've faded out a bit shorter, and it's running on pretty sure it's running on a single polyphony, so it doesn't cross over with itself. So when they're in quick succession, you don't get any overlaps and any messy frequencies in the low end. So hence I can play it nice and close. They don't overlap, they're all just re-triggering. So the next part was to get an EQ and just massively boost the top end to see if there's any artifacts. If a lot of like sampled drums that have been taken out of someone's machine or wherever it came from are going to have some degree of artifact in the top end. It's rare you get a completely clean one, and if anything, this is the sort of thing I like. I always like trying to explore sounds and pull out pieces that aren't normally audible. You can always, lead to interesting effects. So by just jacking up the top end loads, I managed to find a kind of, gave more of a click to it and started to pull it into a more audible range, even on small speakers. The next part was to, again, use parallel distortion. So in the loop, I also have a hi-hat, which I'm going to play you here. So you can see on the mixer, I've got that running out to a master drum bus, and then also running out to a disto drum bus, like a distortion bus. So using the distortion bus with the kick drum, I've basically set it up so that there's a distortion running all the time, but it's not triggered by just the hi-hat. In order for it to hit high enough level to distort, the kick drum has to come into the bus as well. So basically what you end up with is a sound of a desk that's been pushed a bit too hard. It's sort of sound I loved in tracks by people like Dillinger, where he would just smash the low end through the mixer hard, and every time the bass came in, it would push the other elements out of the way, and the bass frequency gives a kind of gating effect, and you actually hear it cutting out little pieces of the high end as it happens. So by adding in the kick drum with the hi-hat, I can create that sound. So here's the kick and the hi-hat without the distortion bus. And then by adding in the second channel, which is, you can see the volume's very low, by adding that in over the top, I give a layer of distortion that's created just by the kick drum and the summing of the kick drum and the hi-hat together. This is mainly done with camel fat again, just some like basic tube and digital distortion. It's a fairly simple little plugin and just has a nice sound. I find it a very quick way to get these sorts of results. You can also hear that that's added upper harmonics to the kick drum, so as soon as this comes in, there's a lot more tone now in the kick drum. It's got a lot more note because you're getting more repetitions of the fundamental through the frequency. So the next thing is to do basically the same with a clap. I've got a fairly straightforward clap here. I've done a little bit of work on it, but not much. Just boost the tops, made sure the bottom end was clean in the EQ, and a really straightforward compression. Nothing much, just to make sure it wasn't doing anything weird. And then all together. There's a couple of other layers of percussion in the track. In the intro, I've got a plugin called Convolver, which kind of, it adds either a sine or a random noise pattern to an incoming signal, essentially. What it does do in real terms is, adjusted right, it gives a kind of low quality MP3 sound to sounds. I've always kind of underwater feel. So basically, by bouncing out different iterations of the loop I already played you, and just affecting them and recording them back in, I made this percussion loop for the intro. So it's a lot more contained. I think I pulled the stereo in as well, just made it kind of as tiny as possible, but it's working almost like a metronome and just keeping pace in the beginning. Underneath that, I've also got another percussion layer here. Again, this is the same sort of thing. I've bounced out the loop, I've dropped it into the slicer, just chopped it up into its basic pieces, and then using some simple plugins I've pulled out a lot of the frequency. So here you can hear those two things working together. And then if I play later in the track when it all comes together. There's also one more kind of weird percussive layer which I just did by almost like scratching. I just found some like random chatter of someone talking, pitched it right down, and again chopped it into bits. And then to give like a scratching effect, I ran a pitch envelope on each individual sample, which is something nice I think you can do in this really easily. So each time it plays one of these little chops, it's pitching it up very quickly in the same sort of way you would like move a record when you're scratching. Just to give a kind of non-melodic but fun way of adding more texture to the track, it just seemed to fit in my brain as well. So putting all these things together anyway, it comes together like this. I'm also using the Fruity limiter for a lot of my sidechain. You could also use LFO tool, which is Xfer's equivalent, basically to make sure that all the lead sounds in this are ducking out the way of the kick drum in a way that makes the kick drum sound bigger. So in order to do that consistently, I don't do it with the actual kick drum. I run a second kick drum that's inaudible, almost like a click, or you can use a MIDI click or anything to activate it. But by doing that, I can control precisely how long the lead ducks out and is out of the way, and then I can sequence it when I want. So perhaps I want it to happen even though the kick's muted or whatever. I have independent control. You might be wondering why I've got kind of different iterations of the same plugin in this project, basically from moving from studio to studio and having to make sure these tracks still work and run. It's kind of difficult to keep up to date with everything, so some instances are running preset banks, which mean I have to keep installing these old versions, which is a bit of a pain, but you know. And I know someone's going to ask about my master chain. On this is pretty much all it is. There's a Pro L, and I always run span on the output or any spectral analyzer just to make sure I know absolutely everything that's going on the track while it plays. On the original master, I also ran a multi-band compressor, which gave me a bit more control and allowed me to like push the presence a bit more. But the master chain in this is basically all I'm doing is making sure I'm using the available headroom. I also, as a kind of good habit, always bring down the master volume to 0.2, just to make sure when you bounce out, sometimes Fruity Loops will basically overstep its mark when it's doing an MP3, for example, and you'll end up with certain players reading that as clips. So you'll have basically signals that are so close to the line that some players will read that as a clipping signal. So just to make sure I never do that, I always pull it down 0.2. So that was me talking about Rat Trap on the Razer Blade. I was John Feemy, thanks for watching.